Hello. So, due to international disruptions, we have less speakers in our introduction than planned. So, earlier than expected, we are going to move into our proceedings. We're going to move now into our first keynote presentation with Dr. Emma Stokes, who is the president of World Physiotherapy. So, Emma, we'll ask you to turn your camera on and we will bring you onto the stage.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today. It's an absolute pleasure and such a privilege to be part of this first Long COVID International Conference. I am going to share my screen in a moment. And I was sitting here waiting for it all to start, and I have chosen a way to tell a story which I hope will, as requested and as you have seen on the slides, set the tone for the forum. And I'm going to take a slightly unusual approach to the presentation, so I hope that you enjoy it. Let me share my screen now. So let me just, this is the one I want. Okay, so let me just dive in. Okay, so Darren, can you just tell me you're seeing the screen with the slide?
Absolutely, it's all working wonderful, Emma.
Brilliant. So today I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to tell you a story about, networks and serendipity and signals and noise. But most importantly, through the fabric of this story are fabulous people working together. And I hope that sets the scene for the forum, because so many people involved in the work of long COVID that I have come across are fabulous people working together in the service of others. All of these enabled us to get from here and the announcement by the World Health Organization of a global pandemic. We had never heard of COVID-19 at that time, but in March 2020, it entered our lives. But those networks and that serendipity and those connections and those fabulous people brought us from March 2020 to September 2021 and our fabulous PT Day and our wonderful, I'm sorry, I just lost my slide there, and our wonderful resources for long COVID. And in a way, it wasn't an absolute given. It wasn't an absolute given that this is the journey that we would have taken. And how we took the journey is really about people. And I'm going to talk a little bit about people and connection and networks. I'm also going to talk about serendipity, when good things happen very unexpectedly and without planning. I'm going to mention a little bit about signal and noise. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I am going to reflect on why I think it's a skill we need to get better at as a community. And it's also about trusting your people. And the story itself starts in the University of Toronto in 2010. So my career as a physiotherapist started back in 1990. But in 2010, I spent time as a visiting scholar in the University of Toronto. And it was only for a short time, but it was an enormously influential time in my life. And I got to meet a fabulous woman called Kelly O'Brien. And I left Toronto and we went about our business and went our separate ways. And then we had this moment of absolute serendipity and taking a chance. And in the spring of 2011, an email came in to my email box in the university, and it talked about Ireland, Canada University Visiting Scholar Fund. And I sent it on to the friends of mine at the University of Toronto and thought, hey, wouldn't this be great? And Kelly, I think you're in the audience, but you remember this. You contacted me and we decided, me in Lviv in Ukraine and you in London in England at a wedding, that we would put this application together at the shortest of notice. Because we reckoned that the worst thing that could happen was that they would say no. And they didn't say no. They said yes. And you came to visit us in Trinity College in Ireland in 2012. And when you were here, you said, I must introduce you to this fabulous human being, Darren Brown. And I was the vice president of World Physiotherapy at the time, and we had a meeting in London of our subgroups and our networks. And I think, Darren, that was probably the first time that you and I met one another together, when you were involved in the physiotherapy network, which became a subgroup, IPT Hope. And then you went on to engage in world physiotherapy in a very different way and in a very, very connected and committed way through your involvement in the network and in the subgroup. And then later on the Congress Programme Committee. And we got to know one another better, and Kelly and I got to know one another better. And I think we came to have a very trusted and trusting friendship and professional relationship. But our paths didn't cross all that often. And then we'll move to March 2020. And I was sitting in Doha and I wrote this message on the Physiotherapist Educators World Physiotherapy Network, which is an online network on Facebook. And interestingly, we didn't have that network. And we had it, but it was in LinkedIn and people weren't really engaged with it. But I remember having a conversation with Tracy Burry and the team at World Physiotherapy, and we were talking about how might we get different type of engagement. So we moved that network to a Facebook group towards the end of 2019. So in March 2020, I sent this message. I said, hello all, greetings from Doha. I know many of us are now teaching online, and this has had a short run-in time for many. My teaching is a bit niche, leadership, etc., and not all of it lends itself immediately to totally online. But I do deliver lectures and seminars online internationally when asked. I wouldn't have super capacity, but I have more now than usual with so many conferences and meetings cancelled. And I might be mad with this offer, but hey, extraordinary times, right? And what I did was I went on to offer to give some lectures on leadership. Now I remember thinking, oh, I'm not going anywhere. This is fine. I can do this. I think probably 2 days after or 3 days after I posted that message, we all went online, and everywhere around the world went online. And so it was just this, I went back to Dublin and suddenly I had made this offer and I was beginning to think I was actually crazy. But a few academics and educators and teachers reached out to me, and one of them was Nikki. And Nikki Clark-Baker reached out to me and she asked me if I'd do a leadership talk for her students. And Nikki and I hadn't met one another before, and I did the leadership talk. And afterwards, she reached out to me and she told me a little bit more about her research. And she told me that she was involved and had co-founded Physios for ME. And we chatted over and back on email. And she, at the time, we were in World Physiotherapy, really trying to think about how could we best support the professional community. And we decided that we would produce a series of briefing papers. And the idea behind the briefing papers was to give the physiotherapy community internationally the information that we knew at the time. acknowledging that that might change as the time moved on. And I think what's amazing is, as a consequence of Nikki, and you'll see on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that this was May 2020, and this is as a consequence of text that Nikki provided in the development of this briefing paper, which is our second briefing paper, was highlighting the potential for people recovering from COVID-19 to develop post-viral fatigue syndrome. So straight away, we were highlighting something that we felt might be coming down the track. And I thought that that was just remarkable. And again, one of those just pure chance connections, which was absolutely amazing. So 3 continents, 2 decades, and 1 global community set us up for the opportunity to support a conversation around appropriate rehabilitation for people who had contracted COVID-19, but very importantly, also to be able to contribute to the growing understanding of living with long COVID. And Steve Jobs, and I use this all the time because it is the absolute truth of my academic and professional career in physiotherapy, which is that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. And boy, have those dots connected in the last few years for World Physiotherapy and our support for long COVID and the community of people living with and supporting those with long COVID. We went on to produce a series of briefing papers. And again, we didn't want these to be perfect. We just wanted them to be as good as they could be at the time that they were produced. Very much drawing on the sort of mantra of Mike Ryan in WHO, which is that we can't let getting everything right get in the way of action. And I think it was a really great opportunity for World Physiotherapy to come into its own in a very different space. And I think what I've learned from that was the idea that sometimes we have to find that signal in the noise. When we were in the midst of those first 2 months of COVID, there was so much going on. And yet that signal was there that this was something that we were going to be dealing with much further down the track. And that we should do something about it. Or if we couldn't do it, that we should empower someone else to do it. And I think that's what we've certainly really tried to do in World Physiotherapy in the way that we've responded to long COVID in particular, and COVID and rehabilitation of people who have had COVID. This is an amazing book, and it's one that I really enjoyed reading actually during that first 6 months when we were all in lockdown. And Dan Heath talks about the barriers to upstream thinking. And when he talks about the barriers to upstream thinking, he really talks about this idea of problem blindness. And that's one of the barriers. The idea that actually there's something out there that we just haven't even spotted it. We don't even acknowledge that there's an issue. But the other aspect of it, which I think is really important, is this concept of lack of ownership. The idea that, we've seen something, but actually it's somebody else's issue. So one of the things that we felt in World Physiotherapy was that actually long COVID wasn't really getting the attention that we felt it needed. And because of the great advocacy of people in the room today, we felt, well, look, we're happy to take ownership of this and make sure that we enable other people to do what needs to be done around it. And the other problem he talks about, which I don't really think, although perhaps we do need to reflect on it, is this idea of tunneling. When you've got so much going on, you don't actually have the bandwidth to think about the other bigger issues. So I think what was really interesting was this feedback from the chair or the president of a World Physiotherapy member organization. In relation to COVID, I would like to say that World Physiotherapy response has been brilliant. I think it shows the real benefit of the organization to gain insight and collaboration between member organizations and to get information out in such a timely manner. Given that we are all still learning, I think that World Physiotherapy having information to share and update has been invaluable and will be going forward. Even if we see the back of COVID through vaccinations, I think as physios, we are going to see ongoing effects from long COVID for some time to come. Now, that was back late, I think, in 2020, maybe early 2021. One of the other things that was absolutely fantastic was when Simon and Darren asked for a meeting with us. And I remember, and Simon, you may or may not recall the meeting, but I remember you were coming to the meeting, and it almost felt like you thought that we were going to say no. And instead, very early in the conversation, we said, okay, how can we help? What do you need us to do to support what it is that you want to do? And we as an organization, supported and enabled, and I hope that's how you feel, the production of this beautiful briefing paper that was contributed to by so many people from the community and around the world in June 2021. And again, that connection through Kelly and Darren and Nikki and then Simon, that whole web of networks allowed us to be able to respond because we had those trusted relationships. We didn't need to spend time working out who this person was. And when you're doing this type of work and you're putting something out into the world, you do need to know that your sources are people you can trust. So I'm going to wrap up very shortly, and I'm happy to take questions. But what I want you to think about today and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and beyond is that networks, they matter so much. And never underestimate the power of them, because you won't necessarily see the connections now, but maybe in 2 or 3 years' time or in 10 years' time, that connection will be so important. I'm happy to provide some very specific material about that. I just didn't want to bring that. I didn't want that to be the tone of the talk today. I think we should never look a gift horse in the eye. Serendipity happens. We could call it all sorts of things, but sometimes you get to connect to the right people at the right time for a reason that allows you to connect to a greater purpose. Looking for the signal is so important. And that does require that we stop and we take a breath and we explore and we really do sense check whose voice might not be in the room, whose perspective might we be missing. Why are we dismissing this particular piece of information that has been brought to us? Taking a chance is always worth it. And I remember saying that back when I delivered the founders lecture at the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy in 2013. It was one of the mantras that I brought, which was take a risk. If you see a problem, take it on, like the long COVID physio community. And find and trust your people, because they are the people that are going to enable absolutely great things to happen. Thank you very much and have a fabulous 2 days.